That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and as he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon.
Thank you, Art. I can't believe this, but my wife Rachel and I, in one way, shape, or form, have been in a relationship now for over 20 years. We're getting ready to celebrate our 19th anniversary of marriage, but we dated for a few years before that. And I came to this realization earlier this year that I have been in a relationship with Rachel longer than I haven't in terms of my life. And that's a mind-blowing concept for me. Now, for some of you sitting in the room today, you're thinking, "Kid, you're a rookie. Get to talk to me when you've been with your spouse for 2 or 3 times your life." But there is something significant about that realization, isn't there? Like, Rachel isn't just a part of my life. This is a core aspect of who I am and the identity I've built, the future I've laid forward. But it's so funny, like when I look back to those early days, there were a number of moments where that reality could have been very, very different. I've told stories in the past about how I got cold feet right up into the point where I said that I would propose, and I made the big mistake of telling her I was going to propose months before I did, but I kept delaying it because all of a sudden the realization of what I was about to do really caught up to me, and I got scared, right? So that didn't go very well, by the way, but luckily I had the smart choice of continuing to go forward with it. But it's amazing how different my life could have been if I'd leaned into that fear or if I'd leaned into that concept. I remember there was one moment that really signified, like, okay, this is where the rubber hits the road. This is the defining moment. This is the it moment. It was our wedding day, right? And so I remember as we were planning the wedding, we wanted an outdoor wedding, and right there, I was absolutely down for it. Fellas, if you haven't been married, a great rule of thumb is whatever the bride-to-be wants, your job is to say yes, right? It's just to facilitate that. And she said the only thing Rachel really wanted was an outdoor wedding. So I said, yes, no problem. But I thought to myself, what if it rains? And her parents, their whole approach is oh no, we've already prayed to God about it. It's all fine. And so I was like, yeah, but, and how do you come back from something like that, right? I'm training to be a pastor. I'm ye of little faith. So, we didn't have a backup plan, which I thought was crazy because we had 200 guests coming. It wasn't like we could move into the shed, okay? So I remember I woke up the day of our wedding and it was downpouring. I mean, just downpouring. And I'm freaking out, and I call up her parents because, they're kind of helping plan the whole thing, and part of me wanted to be yeah, see, I told you so. But again, they came back to me and they said, oh, don't worry about it. We saw the rain. We prayed about it. It'll be fine. You know what? An hour before the wedding started, wouldn't you know it, the rain stopped and the sun came out, and yeah, it was a little wet on the ground, but it wasn't, we were able to go forward with the wedding. I think right there, that one potential moment could have upended the whole thing. I remember dodging a bullet. That was the feeling I had. Then I remember the groomsmen were all supposed to meet beforehand, and my brother was my best man, and he had the ring. And he was 30 minutes late showing up to the thing. We had planned, like, okay, we're going to gather at this point in the back 30 minutes beforehand, and he was 30 minutes late. Literally, he showed up. He wasn't even in a hurry when he showed up. I was so upset at him. And he was, like, playing guitar and singing in my wedding. He had the wedding ring. He's standing up with the... Like, 1 minute before we went up on stage, he's not there, and this is before any of us had cell phones, right? So like, I'm just in the back, panicking. I'm just furious. I'm literally stomping my feet. I'm so angry at him. Because only your brother can get away with something like this, right? Like, I should not on my wedding day be thinking about slugging a sibling, right? But this is where I'm at. But I'm thankful at the same time because when he shows up, the feeling was like, oh, we just dodged a bullet. So here we are. It's the wedding. Everything is ready to go. I'm thinking there's nothing that could potentially go wrong. Up at this point, I'm like, all right, here we go. It's go time. All I got to do is stand up there, let the bride look beautiful, say the vows, say I do, give Rachel a big kiss, which is what she'd been waiting for years for, right? You know. Okay, and then it's all sealed. It's done. And so I remember we start the ceremony. It's going fine, and then it comes to that point where we gotta take the ring, and I gotta place it on her finger and do the vows. And I remember thinking, okay, this is it. There's no turning back. So I grab her beautiful hand and I start to slip the ring on her finger, and I start to say the words that the officiant is stating for me. And I remember getting about halfway on the ring, and all of a sudden Rachel takes her other hand and she blocks the ring from going any further. And at first I'm thinking, this is funny, Rachel, what are you doing? Is this a joke? And she's kind of looking at me, and she's forcing this smile on her face, but she's not relenting. In fact, it goes from blocking the ring from going on to now applying pressure the opposite direction. She is now trying to pull the ring off, and I'm holding the hand firmly, trying to pull it on, like, no, you can't do this to me. Now, I'm going to tell you, it was about 4 or 5 seconds, but a million thoughts went through my head in 4 or 5 seconds, all right? Because I'm thinking, now you're getting cold feet? Now you're changing your mind? Now is the time you're making this kind of decision? And then I start thinking, what am I going to do after this? How am I going to explain this to all my relatives and friends? What does this mean about our relationship? Where do I go from here? How do I recover? Is this going to be a big part of my story? And so we do this little tug of war for about 4 or 5 seconds, and I'm panicking inside because I think, literally, she has changed her mind. It's like that defining moment. It's like, okay, all I can think about looking backwards is the 20-some years of my life with Rachel since then that have kind of signified who I am. We do ministry together. We have kids together. All of our adventures, all the big decisions, the highs and the lows have been connected with her. My life could have looked drastically different if this defining moment hadn't played out the way it did. So here's the end of the story. I was putting the ring on the wrong hand. And my wife, smart enough, was trying to spare me some embarrassment. So yes, she ended up winning the tug of war because I just needed to know what was going on, and then slipped up the other hand. And, the smile was funny. We always loved telling that story. But it was so funny, how in a few seconds, there's so many things that can go through your head. Really dodged a bullet there. But how would my life have been different had I not had that kind of moment of truth with her? When I think about different kinds of situations in our lives, I'm guessing that no one's had really one of those altar moments, at least, when it comes to their own wedding. But I think everyone kind of understands what it means to have a defining moment in their life, or a series of defining moments. And what I mean by that when I say it is that there are those things that you look and you say, hey, depending on what I do here, or what is done to me, or the choice I make, or the direction I go, my life is either going to look this way, or it's going to look this way. And you know what the funny thing is I find that so many times we don't even recognize or realize the defining moments are those kinds of defining moments until we look backwards, right? Sometimes we have no clue it's coming up ahead of us. A wedding is something we know. It's coming up ahead of us. When we have a child on the way, that's coming up ahead of us. But there are some times we look backwards and we go, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. I'm glad I chose that. Or man, I can't believe I went that direction because that was a clear defining moment for my life. I have shared before about how at 19 I had a near-death experience. It shook me to my core. I was not living for Jesus, even though I was raised in the local church. And I'd always believed in God. I always say this. It was just like I didn't care at the time. I was living for me, and I was living a little hard. And I had a really earth-shattering moment in my life where I thought I was going to die. And I walked out of that experience. I remember very distinctly calling out to Jesus, because when you're desperate, when you have nowhere else to turn, you either lean into your old direction, you just double down, or you're desperate, you ask for a life raft, right? And that's what I did. And I remember coming out of that moment, I was wounded and I was scared. But I distinctly believe that the Lord showed up and saved my life in that moment. And what I really had the opportunity to do after that was I could either ignore it and sweep it under the carpet and keep going the direction I had been going, or I could actually take this moment and I could say, Lord, you did something here. I think you have a different plan for my life. And so even though it's going to cost me some of the things I've been chasing over here, I'm going to say yes to you. Was it easy? No. Was it perfect? No. But my life is distinctly different. I have friends over here who are now dead or incarcerated because they doubled down on their choices. I don't say that to brag. All I do is to say, thank God that we still follow someone who gives us second chances, someone who gives grace, someone who still calls. Church, I'm here to tell you today that you have a series of defining moments that are still ahead of you. And if you're here today and you're exploring faith, or you have a faith connection to the Lord, then let me tell you, the most significant defining moments you will have in life have to do in some way, shape, or form with your faith. Even if they're things to do with your family, or your career, or your vocation, or just big decisions that come your way. I find that when we put our trust in Jesus, when we double down on this faith thing, even those peripheral issues that define us are connected to our faith. There is no separating the secular from the sacred in our lives, is there, church? We are connected, we are intertwined. And I tell you this because I'm excited about this new series that we are beginning today that will take us through the next summer months. It's a series called Defining Moments. And what we're going to do is quite literally, we're going to be looking at different characters throughout the Scripture. It's going to be topical. We're going to get to look at some of these great figures, these great characters that if you grew up in the church, you probably heard these stories before. We teach our children these stories. They're significant to our lives. But did you know if you read those stories, every single one of them have a defining moment, don't they? They're going this direction. This happens. The Lord calls them. They have a decision to make. And some of the stories are positive in the choices they make, and some of them ain't. Some of them are negative. But each and every one of them tell us a story and give an example of what we will have the opportunity to decide for ourselves when we face the issues that they are facing. Your life, I don't care how insignificant you think it is, I'm here to tell you, it tells a story. It tells an important story. You've already had defining moments, haven't you? I'm here to tell you, you've got more ahead of you. And I don't care where you are on the journey, those defining moments are going to characterize not only the trajectory of your life and calling, but also influence those that are around you the nearest. So with that, we're going to zero in on the first character in the first story today. And we already heard Art give the story introduction there. But he's next to Jesus, my favorite character in the Bible. From Genesis, his name is Jacob, and I'm going to tell you why he's my favorite character right off the bat. What I love about the scriptures is when they give character assessments of the people who God used, they don't sugarcoat anything, do they? They tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. They don't mythologize their characters, their heroes. There's a lot we learn from some of the negative connotations of the choices they make. Why I love the character of Jacob is because when I read Jacob's story, I feel like I'm looking in a mirror. He is so imperfect. He has so many issues and so many insecurities that define his life and define his characteristics for so much of his life. And yet, in spite of all of those realities, God still has a plan for his life. And the God of second chances offers again and again grace and calling to this most imperfect person. There are times I look at my life, church, and being really honest, I do not deserve the grace of God. I certainly do not deserve the vocation that he's called me into. I am blown away by the grace of God. And that's why the character of Jacob is powerful to me. He is extremely relatable. Here's the story of Jacob, and to back up for a minute, in case you haven't heard it, and it's a great familiarity, just a reminder to those of us who have. If we go all the way back into Genesis, we know that God created, and he created good, but sin was introduced by our poor choices, and no matter how many times God gives the human people, the human race, chance after chance, they keep choosing sin. And in fact, humanity goes from bad to worse really quickly. So God starts and institutes a new plan by which he is going to model and bless the whole world. He is going to develop a nation, and out of this nation will come a Messiah who will take on the sins of humanity that we can't get ourselves out of. He will nail it to a cross, and he will redeem those who put their faith in him. But before any of that, the nation has to be established. The nation was meant to be a people who were distinctly different from all the other nations around them. All the other people follow the gods. They practice these pagan issues. But the people of Israel were to be different to the extent where people would look at them and go, why do you do this? One God? Only one God? Ethics? Morality? Why would you choose these things when we have license over here? They don't really fulfill that mission in fullness, but before we ever get to the nation has to start with a family, a people group. So we learn that God calls 4,000 years ago out of a place of southern Iraq today, a man named Abraham, and he will call him to go to a new land, and he will promise to bless him and make a nation out of him in spite of the fact that he's an old man at this point. And to Abraham's great credit, he says, yes, I will trust you. He goes. And it's out of this trust, this obedience, that God is going to build a new foundation that will establish this people group. But now, it's a couple generations removed from that. Now we're into the story of Jacob. He's the grandson of Abraham. He's what we call a patriarch. He will continue the family line. But the interesting part of the story, when you look at it deeply, is he was never meant to. See, he was not meant to be the carrier of the family line. It was meant to go to his older brother, Esau. Esau was his twin brother, born mere seconds before him. And because of that one physical reality that is outside of his control, in this ancient patriarchal culture, that meant this. Esau would be the child of promise. Can you imagine hearing that your whole life? He will be given a double portion of all his family's estate. He will be told time and again the stories from his father and grandfather of their calling and the promise that will be fulfilled through you and your offspring thereafter you. And Jacob has to sit in the background and stew on this reality because he was just unlucky enough. He had the raw deal of being born seconds before him. We have the Olympic Games coming up here in Paris. I love the Olympics. We're Olympic junkies. We just watch it all the time when it's on TV. And I was researching 1972, the Summer Games in Munich. There was a 400-meter individual swimming medley And the gold medal came down to two swimmers, Sweden's Gunnar Larsson and America's Tim McKee. Both ended up breaking the world record at that point, but there has to only be one winner. And the winner was Sweden's Larsson. And you ready for this? He won by 0.02 of a second. Literally, his time was 4 minutes, 31 seconds, 0.981 compared to 4 minutes, 31 seconds, 0.983. Can you imagine if you're Tim McKee and you've trained your whole life to compete at the Olympic Games? Now, it's a pretty big deal you won silver, but can you imagine playing that scenario over in your head over and over again? You broke the world record. What else do you have to do? And yet it wasn't enough to bring gold back. Can you imagine living with that, playing that scenario in your head over and over again? Well, it gives you just a taste of probably what Jacob is feeling this time. Only Jacob walks away with no consolation prizes. He's the forgotten child. He's the overlooked child. He's kind of just the whatever. His father definitely plays favorites with Esau. And so what happens is Jacob develops something that all of us understand all too well. He develops an inner woundedness. And that woundedness will define his character. It will be his identity. And as he leans into that identity, he will make a series of choices that will morph into from bad to worse. If you know the story, you know this. He will trick and cheat his brother out of his birthright when he's hungry one day. He will deceive his blind-aged father to give the blessing for the future inheritance of the line that God had called them into to Jacob when Esau is out hunting. He will run away from his problems and go north and live 20 years removed from his family. His parents will die. He'll never see them again. He'll live with his uncle Laban. He will find a family and fortune there, but when he runs into conflict, when Laban's away, he will run back away because this is Jacob's M.O. He's a trickster. He's a deceiver. And he's a bit of a coward. He runs away from his problems. So here we are, right before this story. He's coming back to the land of his ancestors. He's coming back to Canaan. And he catches word that Esau and his entourage are on their way to meet him. And now he's got a choice to make because he's got dependents. He's got multiple children behind him. He's got wives behind. He doesn't know what to do. He's panicking. And his MO of tricking and lying and running have kind of led him to this wall. And so one night, as Esau is on his way, he separates them all away. I'd love to know what was going through his head at that moment. Is he praying to God, the God of his ancestors? Is he thinking about the consequences of his life decisions? Does he regret what he did to Esau in this situation? Or is he thinking about running away? We don't know. What we do know is that a divine, mysterious figure will show up next. And it's one of the wildest stories in the Bible. There's been so much ink spilled on what the full meaning of this story is. But in the middle of the night, he'll wrestle with Jacob. And he will not allow him to run away from this situation. So I'm at this phase of being a father where I have children now who are still fairly young, but they're old enough to understand the difference between, ethical decisions, rights and wrongs, expectations in our homes. And we are always reminding them. I don't know about you. Your children are probably perfect, but for me in my home, I'm constantly having to remind them about expectations. But every now and then, there is a repeated offense that is happening that is actually like a characteristic that I see is going to lead them in the wrong direction and causing disharmony in the family. And in those situations, what I'm learning I have to do this, is I have to pull that kid aside and I have to sit them down, and it's a little uncomfortable. And I have to have like what I call a come to Jesus meeting, right? It's like, okay, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about this. And what they desire to do is not have the conversation. What they desire to do is not look me in the eyes. They desire to kind of skirt away. But you understand this if you've been in this situation before. It is absolutely fundamentally critical that we are engaging, as hard as it may be. I cannot allow them to run away or skirt this issue. They have to understand that there are expectations that need to be met. We cannot ignore this issue any further. I kind of think that's what's happening here. Jacob's MO is deceive, lie, and run away. And God shows up, and watch this, out of his mercy. Now that's something we don't think about. We think God's mercy means blessing and sweetness and honey and goodness and lollipops and sunshine. I actually would argue that God is bestowing mercy on Jacob to face up to his problems because he has formed his whole identity around things that eventually lead to conflict, destruction, and despair. Church, is it possible that some of us here today, and I'm talking those who have connected our faith walk with Christ, still carry with us the woundedness of an identity that is tied to mistakes we've made or pain that has been done to us? I don't know about you. Most of us have the fight or flight mechanism in them. Me, it's flight. I don't like hard situations. I want to sweep them under the rug. I want to go a different direction. But there are times, as difficult as it is, I have to face up to those difficult realities. And the most challenging ones are the ones when they're in here. There are times I have looked right here and I haven't liked what I've seen. I've justified them. The ends justify the means, right? But I still don't like them. You know what I've realized about so much of my life is I've carried a deep insecurity about who I am. And so, church, if I can be just brutally honest with you today, there have been times where I have tried to be something I am not. Even in this vocation of being a pastor, I would look at some other ministers out there, people I was friends with or people I looked up to. But to be honest with them, I was kind of jealous of them too because they had bigger opportunities and bigger platforms and bigger stages than I did. And so what I did was, instead of giving that woundedness over to God, I almost doubled down on it. I made decisions about my pace and about my life to chase a certain kind of image when what the Lord wanted to speak into my wounded heart is, Chris, I've created you for this. Rest in me and be comfortable with who you are, but acknowledge the woundedness. I cannot help you. I cannot change you. I cannot release you into your future until you are comfortable to face up to who you really are and what you've allowed into your life. I think that's what's going on with Jacob. This mysterious thing. They wrestle all night. Have you wrestled with God lately? I find that when I wrestle with God, it ain't a 5-minute match, right? It usually gets real. And I think Jacob's doing everything he can to get away from the situation, but God will not let him go. But to Jacob's credit here, now watch this, he will not let God go. When the sun starts to rise, he's holding on for everything dear to him. Now I want you to catch this. This is so powerful, ready? As the sun rises and this mysterious divine figure is trying to get away, Jacob says, not until you bless me. He knows troubles around the court. God, you've got to bless me. I have to know that you're with me from this point forward. And what does the divine figure say to him next? He says, what is your name? There's one other point in Jacob's story where this happens. Jacob knows that his brother is off hunting to bring food back to his blind, aged father. And when that happens, the father will eat it ceremonially and then bless the older son to carry on the promises of God, therefore. And so Jacob comes into the tent. He deceives his blind father, brings food, disguises himself, puts hair on it. Like, Esau was a hairy man. He puts hair, like lamb's hair on his skin. And Isaac, I think, knows something's going on. Something doesn't feel right. The sound of the voice is not what he expects. And he asks this question when Jacob comes to steal the blessing, "What is your name?" Wow. In one situation, Jacob is trying to take the blessing deceivingly, and he's doubled down into that character. But over in this situation, it's like the Lord is forcing Jacob to come to fruition, just come to this realization of who he has allowed himself to become before he can give him the next stage of his story. Jacob, to his credit, will say, "I'm Jacob." Jacob literally means heel grabber, not a very nice name. I'm Jacob. It's who I am. It's painful, isn't it, church? When we have to go before the Lord, when we're raw before him, when we have woundedness, when we've had hurt done to us, when we've made poor decisions in our life, and just bare our souls before him and say, "Look, this is who I am, God. I feel wretched. I certainly don't deserve you. Don't deserve your love. Don't deserve your forgiveness. Don't deserve your grace." Look what's around the corner. What happens thereafter in this situation is he's given a new name. No longer will you be called Jacob. From this point forward, you will be called Israel. Does that name sound familiar? Israel means someone who has strived with God and man and overcome. He's not run away. He's not tried to lie or trick himself out of this situation. He's faced it dead on, and God has given him a new identity. And this is how I know Jacob has really changed after this situation. The second half of his story, from here on out, he will introduce himself when he is brought before Pharaoh, when he is brought before different individuals throughout the land he will wander with his family. And he will say, "My name is Israel." When you catch something. In the midst of this wrestling match, when Jacob will not let go, the Lord touches his hip and he brings it out of socket. The Bible tells us that Jacob will walk with that limp for the rest of his life. But you'll notice something. He does not, that's the last you'll ever hear of that. He does not identify himself by his limp, but by his calling thereafter. Can I propose something to you, church? Identity is a big buzzword out here today in the world. And I'm going to tell you something. A lot of individuals walk in life with a limp, and what they choose to do is build their whole identity around that limp. Hear me today, church. The limp is real. The woundedness is real. Secondary identities are part of your life. But if you have been captured by the love of Jesus Christ, if you've submitted yourself to him, if you've said, "I am not ashamed to be a follower of Jesus Christ," your true identity no longer is determined by your past mistakes. It is not determined by your past choices. It is not even determined by the limp that you carry, as real as it may be. It is determined entirely by the redeeming grace that he offers each and every one of you. And so for me today, the challenge to you is remember whose you are and what you've been called to, and embrace the identity that's before you. I love this verse in Colossians 3. It says this. It's on the screen behind me. "Since then you have been raised with Christ." Watch this. "Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in his glory." I'm going to invite the band to lead us in one last song, but I want to lead you in just one more quick story. A few weeks ago, we are a big baseball family, as many of you know. My son was getting ready to sign up for summer baseball. And if you know how summer baseball works, at least at this level, usually there's like 3 tiers of how it works. There's like a single A team, a double A team, and a triple A team. And the higher the number, the more competitive the baseball is. So my son Micah is good enough to be on the triple A team, right? But he'd be, out of 12, 13 kids, he'd be near the bottom, right? So here's what's going to mean if he plays triple A baseball. He's not going to get a lot of repetitions. He's not going to get to play a lot of the positions he likes to do. He's not going to get a lot of at-bats. He's going to sit on the bench a lot. He's not going to get to pitch at all. And as a father, like, I see my son he's got potential and he loves the game, but he knows that just barely making the squad it's not really what he signed up for. So I went to the league after they did his assessments, and I said, I actually want him to play double A ball, because I knew if he played one level down, he'll be one of the more important individuals on the team. He'll get lots of chances and lots of repetitions. And they came back and said, well, we don't even know if we're going to have a double A team this year because we have no coaches who have signed up yet. And I said these words, oh, I can help. Now, I got an email a week later that said, congratulations, the board has discussed and you've been selected as the head coach of the AA Richmond Chuckers baseball team. And I went, I didn't sign up for that, okay? I don't have my certification filled out totally. I played baseball, but can I say I'm a good baseball player? No. I love the game desperately. But, there's a lot of details to knowing the ins and outs of all what you've got to show a kid to be a baseball coach, right? But there was no one else who could sign up to be able to lead this thing. And so either I said yes or there was no team. And so sucker that I am, here I am. We had our first game yesterday. It was a football score, not a baseball score, right? It was at least we can hit. But hey, this is what I ended up jumping into. And I'm going to be really honest with you. I was really intimidated. I fought against this. I didn't want to assume this identity as a coach, because I just honestly didn't think I had what it took. But I said yes. So you know what I've been doing for the last 2 weeks in my off time? I have been doing the deep dive. I have been going to every clinic. I've been getting certified by what the province requires. And I have been watching one video, and I've been going with other coaches that I know and trust, and I've been learning different mechanics, and I have been looking at different drills. I have gotten a few other parents who know a thing or two about baseball to come around me. Because here's the bottom line. When these 9 and 10-year-olds come to every practice and every game, they are expecting that there's going to be a coach there who shows them at least the direction they're supposed to go. And so it's incumbent upon me, if I said yes, to do the hard work of preparing myself to be able to lead them. Here's the whole reason I tell you this. If Christ has captured your heart, it may be work. There may be times when it's I don't feel like looking at God's word, or maybe I don't want to come here on a Sunday morning, or I don't want to be in a group, but I'm going to choose to do that. The reason there's power in that is that as you learn more of the truth of God's character and the calling He has for each and every one of you, is that you will start to realize that your identity that's rooted in Christ means these realities about you. You are a son. You are a daughter of the Most High King, which means that you are loved. It means that you are chosen. It means that you are forgiven. It means that you are redeemed. It means that you carry purpose. You have gifts. You have supreme value before the God that we love and serve. He still calls people to new identities. And so make the choice to step into it, even if you don't feel worthy, even if you don't feel equipped. Say yes to the identity He has for you. And I promise you, this is a trajectory for your life you will never regret. It may not always be easy, but I promise you, He will never abandon you thereafter. If Israel had not said yes to God, how different would history have been? He will have 12 children. They will literally become the 12 tribes of this great nation of Israel. And out of this nation will come the Messiah that brought hope for the whole world. Your actions, your choices, your decisions to say yes to the true identity that God has for you can make an impact that you cannot see even in this lifetime, but can change the world. So say yes to it. Don't define yourself by the limp, and don't define yourself by the past. Say yes to the future that he has for you. And Heavenly Father, we say thank you so much for a character like Israel, a character who was once defined by all kinds of issues, all kinds of mistakes. I find that he is a mirror for so many of our lives. Lord, I confess to you today that there are times in my life that, like Jacob, I just want to run away. I just want to skirt issues. But thank you that you force me sometimes to do the hard thing. And so, Lord, I give you permission to meet me at any point of my journey. And just, Lord, if we need to wrestle, let's do it. I want to see what you have for my life. I want to be forced to face up to those things in my life that actually take me further from the calling you have for me in the first place. So, Lord, we pray that for each and every one of us who can find a sense of connection to that story, we get that, we're living that. Lord, give us a picture of what you are calling us into. We want to trust you. And Lord, sometimes that's a feeling and sometimes that's a choice. So for those of us today who are struggling, we choose to say yes to you. God, for every defining moment in our lives from here on out, especially those that have to do with our identity, we want to build the foundation of our futures and our lives around the identity that calls us a redeemed, forgiven, chosen child of God. Wow. Thank you, Lord, and lead us in it. We love you. In your name, amen.